According to an official from the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, Hawaii still has the highest per capita homeless population in the country. But things have started to gel. What do you think? What programs seem to be working? What pending legislation from this session could make a real difference? How do we know if Hawaii has turned a corner in the homeless crisis? This live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now. When David Ige took the governor's office in 2015, the state of Hawaii was facing a crisis level of homelessness, the worst in the nation. According to the 2017 count, more recently though, homelessness statewide is down 9%. Katy Miller of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness commended the state's progress, saying Hawaii is on the right path and is implementing really promising practices. All of these things take time, she said. 2018 marks the last year of Governor Ige's first term in office and presents an ideal time to weigh in and examine the state's homelessness plan. Has Hawaii turned a corner in the homeless crisis? Joining us in our studio tonight is the state's homeless coordinator and those advocating for or providing services to the homeless. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Scott Murashige serves as the state's point person for homelessness, which includes leading the Hawaii Interagency Council. Hawaii Interagency Council. I'm going to try and avoid acronyms, which means I have a lot of long titles to go through. And the staffing, the state government, he also staffs of the state. I'm really botching this up. He runs the governor's homelessness thing. Kimo Cavallo from the Director of Community Relations for the Institute for Human Services. I just got back from vacation, so I'm a little rusty. The oldest and largest human services agency focused exclusively on ending and preventing homelessness in Hawaii. Gavin Thornton is co-executive director with the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, a local nonprofit research and advocacy organization focused on genuine opportunities for economic security. And Jay King is the poverty relief coordinator for Aloha United Way. He is focused on homeless solutions, systems, and status of response. Let's start off by talking though a little bit, and we'll start with you, Scott. I mean, have we turned the corner? You know, where are we? Do you think we are? We have another point in time count coming out in the next few weeks. What do you think it's going to say in terms of the homelessness situation?
Well, I think, I'm very hopeful that we'll see, a continued decrease in our homeless numbers. I think that we really started to build a foundation for change. And last year was really significant because the 9% reduction statewide was the first reduction in homelessness that we've seen in 8 years. And in other parts of the country, particularly on the West Coast, we're seeing double-digit increases in homelessness in places like Los Angeles, Portland, San Francisco, Seattle. But Hawaii, we actually went in the opposite direction. So I think that's something that's very positive, and I'm very hopeful that we can continue that trend.
Kimo Cavallo with IHS, what are you folks seeing in terms of the population? And I mean, where have we made progress and where are we still struggling?
I think that what Scott just said in terms of building a foundation and really looking at the front end services of moving unsheltered people off the streets and into housing a lot quicker is definitely getting better. I think though that when we talk about, are we turning the corner in homelessness and we want to look at things comprehensively, I think that there's many more initiatives and areas and systems that we really have to fix. And while the point in time count, I always say, it is just an indicator of one day. It does not count those people who refuse to do the surveys. It doesn't count the people who are living in cars, which oftentimes are working homeless. We just learned that those people couch surfing are oftentimes homeless youth. There's a lot of homeless in our prisons, our jails, our hospitals, our state hospitals. So there's just a lot more homeless people. And I think if we look comprehensively, we really have to identify all those pipelines of how they're falling into the systems and slow down those pipelines in addition to moving them out.
Gavin Thornton from Appleseed, what's your perception of the situation? I mean, have we made some progress?
Yeah, definitely. I really do think that we have turned a corner. We saw the homelessness rates go up and up and up year after year. And last year, finally, they went down for the first time. Before that, I remember we were celebrating somewhat that the rate of increase in the number of homeless people had gone down. So no, I definitely think we're making progress in terms of the numbers. And then I've seen so much progress in terms of the coordination among homeless service providers. We have a very solid system in place now that's data-driven, sharing that information among service providers so that if someone comes in the door, they get an assessment that is done by nearly all of the homeless service provider organizations, same assessment. That information is then shared. They're placed with an agency that has the services that that person needs.
Somewhat customized.
Yes, customized, data-driven. We've seen a lot of improvement there.
Jay King from Aloha United Way, what's your perception of what our homeless population looks like today?
First, I would say there's definitely evidence of moving forward, but are we making a difference? I think it has to do with if you're homeless or not, right? So the homeless person's going to say, "I don't care about your improvements," right? So I think it really based upon those who are housed and those who aren't. So I agree with Gavin and and Kimo and Scott and what they're saying, but I would also say, quite frankly, that I would expect, and quite frankly, I don't want to say I hope, but I would expect to see higher numbers, because this is the year that we have the coordinated entry system and we have a new federal mandate that everybody's additional coordination together to gather more people. Well, I've seen the list grow, so I'm going to see more numbers.
Okay, good. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Let's go back and we'll take a look at the results of the last point in time count. Again, I have to repeat that this was actually done in January 22nd of last year. The report takes several months to generate, so we don't really see the numbers until May or even June sometimes. So if we look at it, I'll go through these fairly quickly. It reported a 9% decrease in the number of homeless individuals year to year, 8% decrease in the number of sheltered and unsheltered homeless vets year to year, an 8% decrease in chronic homeless individuals year to year, 19% decrease in homeless families year to year. But then when you look at the county by county breakdown a little bit more, it is kind of striking how, and if we'll go all the way over to the right side column of this is the easiest way to really gauge this. From island to island or county to county, Honolulu was up 19%. Now, that only, was up 19 people, I'm sorry. My eyes are a little crossed. Scott was about to pass out. And then 0.4%. But then the dramatic reductions on Hawaii County and Maui County, and then Kauai County, and the statewide total was very much driven by the neighbor islands. Why is it so disparate? Why would it be so much better on the neighbor islands, for example, than the basically steady state of Honolulu, Scott?
Well, I think one thing we need to look at is we have to really look more closely at the Oahu numbers. And so yes, the numbers went up by 19 people, less than 1%. But partly that's because we did a better job of actually counting people in areas that had historically been significantly undercounted, such as Windward, Oahu, and Central Oahu, Wahiawa, North Shore area. And if you look at the point-in-time count data where we saw the largest increases, over 120% increases in some areas, it's in those two communities. But
actually, I don't want to interrupt you, but I will, because I want to just throw up this county, this regional Oahu graphic so people can see what you're talking about. But go ahead and continue when you talk about these different areas, and if you want, you can use my paper. Okay.
So yeah, no, when we were going out and preparing for the point-in-time count last year, when we went out to Wahiawa and we went up to the Windward side, and you can see Windward had a 122% increase, and Wahiawa to North Shore had
that wasn't real, right? I mean, that was just counting people that were there before.
We were counting people that have always been there. So if you take that into account, that we're counting people that have always been there, and it only went up by 19 people, less than 1%, I think it puts those numbers into a different context.
The other thing that I'd like to ask, and you guys can all pitch in on this, is this kind of points out to me kind of the flaw in this system of walking out and trying to capture people. It depends on how many volunteers you have in any given area. It depends on the type of lifestyle, the living that these folks are in. So what struck me is when I heard, for example, Kimo, you can help me with this because you deal with these. When they broke it down by region, Waikiki was lumped in with East Honolulu.
Correct.
And then Kaka'ako, where we had a big homeless problem, was lumped in with downtown. And so you end up with that kind of statistical anomaly of just where the lines were drawn.
And it's not even accurate because it's, you know, like I said earlier, people refuse, and there are some people who are not there, and we know that they're there. I almost feel that if we were to actually look at the whole actual homeless population on that night, we're missing almost half the population.
Oh, really?
I think that if we were to really judge progress by the point in time count, I think that one day people are going to start asking those questions that you mentioned earlier. Why are you touting success, but we still see a crisis on the streets? And I think that we really do need to look at those system issues that are causing homelessness and policy fixes that are needed at a leadership level. We're talking, you know, our mental health system, our public safety system, and discharge planning. You know, our mentally ill population, I'd say, is probably the most criminalized of any state in the country. I think that we really need to look at fixing a lot of these system issues causing homelessness and looking at a comprehensive count if you really want to have a good indicator. I completely understand that this is the best indicator we got. My opinion, humbly though, is that if something doesn't work and it's not reflective, change it.
Yeah, you know, Jay King with the Loyal United Way is actually involved in that process of maybe not replacing the point in time count, but describe the system that's now being used to track folks that are coming into the social services and so on.
I guess the first thing I would say is why even give that oxygen? It's a statistical sample. It's one night, it's a moment in time, it's a snapshot. That's not indicative of all the work that everybody's doing, and it's not indicative of the problem, the history, or quite frankly, the future. It, quite frankly, has so many variables with our point in time count that there's nothing to me, or there's,
I mean, if you get a bad weather night, you can't find anybody, right?
It could be that. It could be people that have experienced enforcements, and so now they've kind of been conditioned to avoid interacting with certain people. It could be areas. It could be an outreach team or a program that no longer operates in that area, and so you don't have that same sort of rapport. There's just a lot of variables. And so for me, with coordinated entry system, with what we're doing now is what the providers are doing. And you know, every provider is they're doing a vulnerability survey, one standard measurement tool, and everybody gets entered into the database. That day to day, week to week, is the number that we could look at and really see where we're at. So when we started in August as a kind of a soft launch, it was about 1,800 people on our individuals by name list. That has now grown to 2,950.
Is that sheltered and unsheltered?
Yes.
Okay.
And now, is that where are we going to plateau? We don't know. But that's why I say we're going to see increasing numbers, because that means that we're having increased coordination.
That's statewide, right?
Nope, that's for Oahu.
That's Oahu.
Yes.
Okay, so you've got about, and you're just dealing with individuals, right?
Yes.
Not
and
families.
there's another 600 households on the families list.
Okay, so Scott, let me let you respond a little bit. I mean, the governor's office in particular points a lot at this point in time as a benchmark of improvement. You want to respond a little bit to the criticisms of it as a statistical thing?
No, I mean, I actually agree with what Kimo and Jay have said, that it's not a perfect indicator by any means, but I think it is one indicator that we have, and it's not the only thing that we look at. There's data coming from the Homeless Management Information System, the HMAS, which is a number of people that receive services in a given year. So we analyze that data as well. And we've also looked at data coming up from new initiatives driven by the community. For example, one of those that was really successful is something called Housing ASAP, which was piloted by the Hawaii Community Foundation. I believe IHS was a part of that. Mm-hmm. And their data shows that there's been significant reduction in family homelessness statewide over the past 3 years. And I think that's kind of correlated with what we see in the point in time count as far as the reduction. I believe it was about a 19% reduction in family homelessness last year statewide. So I think there's some correlation between the two data sets we're looking at. I think that definitely there's a lot more that can be done to address the ongoing issues that we're seeing. But what the governor and the administration, I think, have really started to do is build the foundation. This is not an issue that came up overnight. It took many years for us to get to this point, and it's going to take time for us to get out of this situation. But we're laying the groundwork, putting contracting processes in place, really putting the focus on getting people into permanent housing. We're giving state agencies that manage land the tools they need to better maintain their properties. And we're also working with law enforcement, other community partners to create diversion programs that divert people from the criminal justice system and link them to housing and supportive services. We're also through the State Department of Human Services MedQuest division looking to address how we can better provide case management by leveraging federal funds, seeking a waiver amendment to our existing 1115 Medicaid waiver to address some of the issues that Kimo pointed out. So I think that we're creating the foundation, continuing to build off of that. But when we look at the data, both from the point in time count as well as from the HMS and other initiatives like the Housing ASAP, I think we do see that there are some early signs of progress. And we need to really continue to invest in the programs that we know have been working so we can continue that forward momentum.
Let me add, for everyone though, I mean, I think that, we mentioned this at the beginning of the show, the poll that said 42% of people don't feel like they've noticed. Why do you think there is this perception out there that it hasn't gotten better?
Inflow, outflow.
So you think that it hasn't gotten
Sometimes
better?
we're playing for the tie, and tie's a win. It's a win to that person who just ended their time of homelessness.
Kevin, what do you think?
Well, I mean, driving here this evening, I mean, it is undeniable. I don't think anyone's hanging up the mission accomplished banner.
There's a sign up there, right? It says yield to homeless. We drive around. Yeah.
So no, I don't think we're anywhere near resolving the problem. I still do believe we've turned a corner. I think there are indicators. Maybe it's because you caught me on a good day, because just a couple days ago, the legislature appropriated $200 million for affordable housing, for the rental housing revolving fund. Last year, it was $25 million. $25 million to $200 million for building affordable housing. That is absolutely critical to getting out of this affordable housing and homelessness crisis. And that is the type of investment that we need to consistently make in order to really address this problem. I mean, it is a big-time problem, and we need big-time solutions.
Kimo, where is the perception, do you think, perhaps because many of the homeless who are out are right there? They move from place to place, and they're just very visible?
Yeah, I believe, yes. You see visible homelessness, yes. I think the public continues to have reinforced perceptions that it is still a crisis. I think, though, that, Scott had mentioned, just the reduction of family homelessness in March 2018, so this is just one snapshot of this month. We currently have 575 active homeless family households that are waiting for housing. We've moved 24 of those into permanent supportive housing, but 86, Daryl, have fallen into homelessness. So they're newly VI-SPIN-added family households. 53 of them have actually had a past experience of homelessness. And I think that's just a nice reflection of the problem that I'm trying to paint here. Yes, $200 million is definitely something to celebrate, but if we're talking about these people, if we're really going to have affordable housing and homelessness in the same sentence, then I'm talking about people who are about 50% AMI or below, but affordable housing is really all the way up to 140% AMI or below. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to have that conversation, there just needs to be a lot more, and I don't want to discount success and progress. It's a big, big win for us. But I think that we really need to fix a lot more system policies. In this case, increasing case management, giving people support services, not just housing. You can't just warehouse them and put them somewhere. You also have to help motivate them to build savings, build financial literacy, get a job, build some self-sufficiency long-term.
The causes of homelessness, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and also, but I mean, Gavin, you wanted to say something. I'm sorry.
I was just going to translate. Kimo was talking about AMIs, area median income. Close to half of the housing units that we need approaching 2025, the year 2025, are needed for families that are making under $45,000 a year. So the housing that we build needs to be built for those low income levels. 75% of the housing needed is for families making under $75,000 a year. So that is where we need to build. we've been having a very hard time doing it. It hasn't been
The
happening.
money is supposed to go towards
the allocation.
the low income.
So on the $200 million appropriation, the good news is that it is focused on those lower income levels. There was also, as part of the same measure, something passed that would create a general excise tax exemption worth $30 million.
You know, Kevin, let's talk more about these solutions a little bit later in the show. I want to really get together our snapshot here. You know, I've got a couple questions here. We're getting quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to parse through them rather than trying to read all of them right away, because there's a number of them. But one of the impressions I'm getting from our callers are, you know, the homeless are making a lot of trash. There might be fewer of them, but they're making more trash, was one caller. And I think that's about the visibility and maybe the chronic nature of it. Like, there's a spot on Nimitz Highway, not far from where I work, that they seem to be sweeping every 4 or 5 days. And someone told me, oh, it's basically maid service. Scott, I mean, what's left? Where is the biggest challenge out there right now of the population? What's the most challenged group of people we have out there? Are there 2 or 3 of them? Or?
Well, I think a couple things I wanted to say. I think one thing that the data is telling us from the point in time is, although the overall numbers of homeless individuals statewide has been trending down, on Oahu, we've seen a trend over the past 5 years where the number of homeless individuals in shelter has gone down, but the number of unsheltered individuals has been increasing pretty significantly. So I think that shows us where we need to concentrate our effort.
Because we always hear there's plenty of shelter space, but there's people out of the street.
I think what we need to do is to invest in permanent supportive housing solutions. And there's 2 data sets that the community is required to report to HUD annually. One is the point-in-time count that we've been talking about. The other is something called the housing inventory count, which is a count of the number of shelter bed spaces and permanent housing bed spaces that specifically assess homeless individuals. One of the things historically, up until maybe about 2015, we've only had about 5,000 on average shelter and permanent housing bed spaces combined, while the number of homeless individuals has been as high as 7,900 statewide in recent years. In 2017, we saw something really interesting where the number of bed spaces in the housing inventory count went up significantly to over 7,500 bed spaces, where the number of homeless individuals statewide went down. And so what our framework, the state's approach has really been focused on is trying to move the needle down in terms of the number of people experiencing homelessness, but also work to increase resources that provide not just a warehouse space for them, but for a home with supportive services attached. And I think the housing inventory count data, which not as many people are aware of, I think shows that trend. If you look at the housing inventory count data together with the point-in-time count data, it shows we've been increasing as a community the number of shelters and permanent housing bed spaces for those experiencing homelessness, and the number of homeless individuals has been going down. And I think it's a collaborative effort. I don't think it's purely a state thing.
Where are those units coming from?
But partly it's coming because our continuum of care, which are coalitions of service providers that one of their main purposes is to apply for federal funding from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. They've really been working to increase the level of federal funding that we've been getting in for new projects. One of the new projects that IHS runs, I think, is a program for homeless youth that helps provide them housing. There's also been permanent housing programs that have been awarded to other providers in our continuum of care, such as U.S. Vets, Mental Health Kokua. And I think those new awards for permanent housing beds collectively has helped to increase that number of beds in the housing inventory count.
Kimo, from IHS, is that your perception? I mean, how does that work on the ground when you're trying to find people housing? I mean, is it easier to find spaces for people in permanent housing now?
Well, for the last 11, 12 years, IHS has really developed a robust network of landlords and property manager relationships that have really allowed us to move a lot of people into permanent supportive housing. So we're housing on average between 1,600 to 1,800 a year And that includes everything from, your
is that new people? Like if it's this year 1,600, next year another 1,600, next year another 1,600, or is it a churning that's happening?
You'd be surprised. It's actually a spectrum. So it's, preventing people from falling into homelessness by just giving them a shallow subsidy. Sometimes maybe another type of private program like an airline relocation back home to the mainland, but ensuring they do have a home, all the way up the spectrum to your most vulnerable chronic homeless person, which is our Housing First program. So we have, I believe right now, 9 different housing subsidy programs that we manage, and every year it changes based on the federal and state and city funds that we get. But the big problem really quick is it's not just about housing, guys. We put people into housing, but we have to ensure that they maintain housing long term. And, like even when we look at the shallow subsidies, that population, that group actually has the lowest risk for falling back into homelessness. And the reason for that is because of the intensive case management that we provide and giving them just enough to actually get back on their feet and get back into some kind of self-sufficient, type of lifestyle. We work on their treatment plans. We work on their job employment plans. We work on, rebuilding a sense of community and well-being. So it's not just about, it's about ending the whole cycle of homelessness, not just housing them, but really ending that cycle of, poverty and that lifestyle.
Let me throw up another graphic for a moment. We've been talking kind of about some of these things, but the state's homeless plan has what they call 3 levers, and I'd like to go through these and chat about each of them. First of all, the top lever on this chart is public safety in public spaces while assisting the unsheltered with housing and human services. Gavin, can you describe what that means?
I don't know. Maybe you should. I'll turn that one over to Scott.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so what does that mean? Public safety in public spaces while assisting the unsheltered with housing and human services.
So one of, I think, the things that is most visible about the issue of homelessness is we see homeless individuals living in public spaces like parks or on the sidewalk, sometimes impeding public access to these areas. But unfortunately, we also have people living in areas that are very unsafe. Such as I think maybe a year and a half ago, we had people literally living right above the H1 freeway, where items possibly falling into the freeway, which could cause potential hazards both for motorists, but also for the people living there if they were to fall into the roadway. So government, I believe, has an obligation to respond to these areas, and we have. We really work to give departments like Department of Land and Natural Resources and Department of Transportation the tools they need to maintain their properties. But at the same time, we don't want to just displace people from one location to another. So what we try to do is to coordinate these efforts with outreach providers like Institute for Human Services, Kalihi Lama Health Center, the Child Project, the many outreach providers that are in our continuum, and make sure that we have assertive outreach both prior to an enforcement and actually during an enforcement. So if somebody, during the middle of one of these cleanup efforts says, hey, you know what, I really want to go to shelter housing, or I really want to get help, that we have somebody there to help them connect to that, to help assess them so they can get on the by name list through the coordinated entry system that Jay manages, and really trying to connect the public safety piece to the other 2 leverage points in our framework.
Let me go to the second one.
So if I
go
can
ahead.
jump in on that part. So I think that's really important because number one, we want to prioritize the greatest need. Right, and so that is the collaboration. And so while we can, look at their numbers of beds and this and that, the most important thing we need to start with is who needs it the most, who are perishing on our streets and our sidewalks. And so I think whether it be, quite frankly, I think Scott has the hardest job in Hawaii. Like it's just wouldn't want it. It's a hard one. You're gonna push Jello uphill. It's a real hard job.
At least he doesn't have to run for re-election.
But I think the honorable part of all of that is that through all of those operations, through that, you call it an enforcement, through working with chemo, through the outreach teams, they're going to identify the greatest need, that one person who needs it the most. And so we now have a coordinated entry system that can be flagged for our awareness, and we can work together to prioritize that person next because it matters to that one. And so we deal with them one at a time. We talk about big numbers, but we should never go so fast that we forget about it matters, that life-saving one.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm thinking of actual people, and in terms of greatest need, okay, I'm thinking of the chronic homeless, mentally ill person who is at a complete disadvantage because the It's not until that person commits a crime does actually, police picks them up, takes them to the cell block. They have 24 hours. If they go to trial, then they likely get community service. If they go into state hospital, they could get stuck there, or they get discharged back on the streets. And then when they're back on the streets, they cycle back through, the Health and Human Services system. At the same time, they're taking, meth or other illicit drugs. They're on top of that, developing chronic health conditions, which is causing more exacerbating problems. So when Jay says, your person in most need, and Scott saying, okay, permanent housing, I'm trying to look at the two and think about the person and all the barriers preventing that person from actually accessing a real home.
Let me
Opportunity and crisis can sometimes be the same thing.
Well, you see, that makes me think of compassionate disruption, right? I mean, creating crisis for people who are on the street by moving them forces them to get housing. That seems to be the concept of it. Gavin Thornton, I mean, is there disagreement in the services community over whether that's the appropriate way to be dealing with people?
Yeah, a lot. So very controversial issue. I mean, I think on one hand, you have the viewpoint that Scott essentially described with the public safety, the enforcements, the sweeps. On the other hand, you have a lot of people concerned that when you disrupt people, when you disrupt encampments where people have, folks that really don't have much stability in their lives at all, and you disrupt the little bit of stability that you have, you disrupt the relationships that you have, the problems that we've heard of about people losing identification, their property being thrown away. I mean, those are, in some circumstances, you are making it harder for people to get out of homelessness. So lots of really strong opinions on that issue.
Let me read just one card from, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to fit them all into our conversation here.
Good luck, yes.
Viewer was part of the count process and was notified, this is a point-in-time count process, was notified that sweeps were done the week prior, so homeless were hiding and not an accurate count. Need to improve communication between agencies. Kimo Carvalho from IHS, I mean, do you think that sometimes the efforts to move homeless out of the way, to clear them out, get all that stuff out of the way, is doing more harm than good? Or is that like one agency's policy bumping up against another agency's policy? Where they're not even agreeing on what the right policy is?
I think the first thing to know is that enforcements, I'd stay away from the word sweeps because there's many types of enforcements. There's SBOs, there's sit-lie laws, there's sweeps.
Well, go ahead. You can go into that a little bit if you want, because I think the average person just pictures a sweep as being the garbage truck comes up, everybody walks away, they throw away all the trash, and then they come back.
Enforcement is about disrupting their lifestyle of being comfortable on the streets. And I do understand Gavin's perspective, and by all means, this is not a solution to homelessness. It never was supposed to be. It's one of many different tools. There's so many tools at our disposal, like treatment, psychiatric treatment, mobile hygiene center. There's so many different things, and enforcement is just one of them. We have actually seen a lot of people respond positively to enforcement actions. We took in over 800 people out of Waikiki over 3 years just because of the sit-lie law. And for the first time, a police officer was able to go up to a client and say, are you homeless? Do you need help? You're not supposed to be here, but maybe you might want services from IHS. And sometimes they say no, and we expected that. But a lot of times they did say yes. And for us, when we go out 40, 50, 60 times to the same person, to me, in my opinion, that is wasting a lot of taxpayer dollars when they're just saying no. And so sometimes you just need a little bit of that push. Yes, it does actually, disrupt something of their lives, but in long term, it actually gives them more stability and structure and reason to actually look at a quality of life and move forward in their lives.
Question from I'm sorry, Scott, but a question from a viewer: why haven't the police, right in line with what you're saying, why haven't the police done anything with the homeless in Waikiki, which exhibit criminal behavior, referencing Hawaii News Now story?
First, there's the part of so there's this silly saying, not to make light of this tragic, situation we're talking about. Housework is something nobody notices unless you don't do it. Actually, they have done a lot. That's why it's not worse. Like, so there's a certain amount that you have to recognize, all that is being done, that we're in the quality of life that we have right now. We are still in the midst of a homeless crisis, but that does not negate the fact and all the work that all the homeless service providers, HPD, and the entire continuum of care and community has worked to help all those that you don't see on the streets.
And those people in Waikiki, those people in Waikiki, not all of them are homeless, and we need to almost remove that homelessness stigma and actually look at their criminal behaviors, because that's actually what's, for some of them who are homeless, what is reinforcing their homelessness. So, go ahead, Scott.
One thing I just want to clarify is homelessness in and of itself is not a crime, and I think we need to understand that. And when the state does enforcement actions, we don't just do it arbitrarily. We're enforcing specific laws, such as criminal trespass in areas that are restricted to everyone, to all members of the public for people's safety, as well as laws like sidewalk obstruction if someone's blocking a public sidewalk, or park closure hours. But I think homeless in and of itself is not a crime. And sometimes people drive by and they see a homeless individual and they may call Honolulu Police Department because they don't know what else to do. But the officer responds. They're a lot of times not able to take legal action because there's no crime taking place. But what the governor and I think the administration really has tried to do is engage law enforcement. How can they be more active partners at the table together with our service providers? And last week, the governor announced a program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, or LEAD, which really works together with HPD and service providers to, if someone is committing a very low-level offense, instead of arresting the person, the HPD officer now has another alternative to link them to a provider, such as IHS or others, and divert them from the system. And we really want to try and look at working with law enforcement as partners, because they cannot always take actions if there's no crime taking place, but they see many of the homeless individuals in the community. We're trying to leverage that to reach people who we may not otherwise be able to reach.
You know, I'm getting an impression, and also from some of these questions, and in my own experience in talking to the public about homelessness, is that we went from a point a couple of years ago, probably about the time the governor came up, where there was a lot more, there seemed to be a level of compassion. Now there seems to be in the public a little bit more irritation and anger with the homeless people that are still remaining. People feel like we've been at this long enough. Everybody who wants housing can get housing. I don't know that that's true, but seems to be this anger. So I have a caller here. When I see homeless breaking the law, like occupying public land and openly doing drugs and drunk in public, they don't get arrested. The government has created a two-tier population, giving benefits to people who don't pay taxes and destroy our beaches and lands. And here's another one. I feel that women who can't afford children should not have them because it contributes to the welfare and homeless situation. We need to educate people on this. And this is from a woman who said she decided not to have a child when she was homeless.
You have an interesting audience.
Well, there's a variety here. There's also people wanting to know, for example, is there any city in the United States that has a comparable homeless population and solved it? If so, how?
Daryl, can I respond to a few of those things? So
2A, 3B?
I'm not sure what the number is. Yeah. Just yesterday, I was talking to someone who's formerly homeless. And he talked about how before he became homeless, he would see young homeless people on the streets, and he would tell them to go get a job. And then he had a tumor on his pituitary gland, and he became homeless. Mm-hmm. And so he talked about how he developed a little more empathy through that process. He ended up being homeless, I believe, for a year. Mm-hmm. I understand that people get frustrated and angry, but I think it's really important that we don't make snap judgments about the folks that are out there on the streets. Half of the population in Hawaii lives paycheck to paycheck. Half of the population, one paycheck away from financial disaster. So it could be almost any of us. You know,
Kimo, you deal a lot with individuals, and when you actually talk to individuals about their stories, 90% of the time when I've done it, you get a story like that. There's a reason.
Yep. There's there's so many different homeless subpopulations, and the type that Gavin is talking about, I believe we are able to use our coordinated entry system to really quickly assess them, identify them, get them into housing, get them services, and oftentimes that is actually a successful route. But the comments that you were saying, and even to what Scott was saying in LEAD, the Law Assistant Enforcement Diversion Program, if we're looking at addicts or people who are committing a crime and they're homeless, the thing is, okay, we can divert them to come to shelters or to other programs, but at the end they need treatment beds. They need, we're talking policies on the back end that have not been addressed by this administration that I really feel are important up until recently. But, I think that in order for a lot of these types of programs to work, we need different types of housing programs targeting very different homeless subpopulations.
Let me throw that at you, Scott, because we're nearing the end of a legislature. There's still stuff that hasn't been determined, but is there a real investment in those kind of services that Kimo is talking about? Are we going to see that, or is it going to be just shuffling people around from place to place until they find a place?
I think even one of the things just over the couple years that we've, past few years, is we've been able to build out programs to help people who have severe mental illness as well as substance use disorders who are experiencing homelessness. Last year, the legislature appropriated about $1.3 million for Department of Health for these programs, and with that funding, we were able to work together with IHS to create an intensive case management pilot program in the downtown Chinatown area in partnership with Queens Medical Center and HPD to target those who are the most severely mentally ill, who consistently get encountered by HPD, get what they call MH1 sent to Queens and cycle through. Right. And we've all heard the stories about Queens saying we have so many people just frequently cycling through the emergency room. But this program, the ICM pilot program, in just a short time it's been in existence, I think has been very successful. It's been able to reduce the recidivism for many of these individuals. I think through the hard work of IHS and their case managers. In addition to that, we've seen programs like LEAD coming online. And there's other initiatives coming up driven by the community.
But is there enough money to really take care of these people, or is it a pilot project here and a little, this little thing over here, a little thing over here?
I think the other thing that we're doing is we're leveraging other types of funding streams. So the Medicaid 1115 waiver amendment I talked about earlier, what that will do will significantly expand the level of the type of population that can receive case management services through their health plan. So we can leverage the case management provided through the health plans to provide more support for some of these individuals who are experiencing homelessness who don't qualify for case management now. So we're not just waiting for more funding to be appropriated with us. I think the administration and Governor Ige is really taking the initiative to figure out what can we do to better utilize Medicaid funding, to better leverage existing dollars, to work collaboratively to try and grow our budget as much as we can, and we have over the past few years.
Okay, good. I got a couple more questions, and a couple of the questions here have come from people who are asking about, which are essentially this concept of Ohana zones or safe zones. Why don't we take the $200 million to build a little town outside Honolulu? The homeless could be trained to build and run the town. Very similar to what the Waianae thing is, which is probably going to be moved at some point. But is that a concept that we need? Is that a good idea to provide places with semi-permanent housing, at least until we get the inventory up? Any thoughts?
So first, I think this Ohana zones, safe zones, call it what you want, involves one thing is when we talk about criminalizing homelessness, right? So when you make it against the law for a human body function, to sleep, to use the bathroom, et cetera, and you don't provide some place to do that, those sort of human things, then you are criminalizing homelessness. So I think there's an important reality we all have to embrace together, is saying we need some place to shelter them. And shelter can come, is not just brick and mortar. It can be so many things. So we can call it Ohana Zone, we can call it Safe Zone, we can call it Sand Island, we can call it a lot of different things. But the most important thing is we're giving people a choice. So I think that's the number one part, is just saying, like, we're never going to end homelessness, and it may sound like semantics, but we can end helplessness. We can give people a choice. You can't do this, but you can do this here. And when you're ready, we're here to support you and surround you with services to give you those choices. And if you don't have the capacity or competency to make that choice, we want to provide that structure and stability and support to help you get to that place with our mentally ill to make those said choices.
You know, Gavin Thornton, you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of agencies, folks like yourselves, that don't like the sweeps. Is an Ohana type zone an alternative that you would support? That, okay, we're not going to, if you go over there, we won't sweep you, but we also want to ask a whole lot of questions about your lifestyle or your pets or that sort of thing.
Yeah. So to be quite honest, I don't really understand all the details of Ohana zones, but I do know this. So I look at the Waianae Boat Harbor, which is kind of developed organically, and I think that some stability has come out of that. Some good things have come out of that. Those are people that maybe wouldn't be comfortable going into the shelters or going other places. They are now in a place where they can receive services, like people can find where they are. I think having a diverse array of potential services, I think anyone that is a parent of more than one child knows that everybody is different. Everybody has different personalities. For some people, maybe it's going to work. The enforcements are going to get them outside of their comfort zone, and they're going to go into the shelter. But for some people, it's not. For some people, it's going to be a disruption, but maybe something else will work. So I think experimentation, trying new things, having some diversity in the array of services that we provide, that kind of thing does make sense.
Kimo, you're the most experienced here with actual sheltering of people. Do you think that that kind of concept can work? I know we are talking sort of about vague ideas of what it is. I think that what the legislature is looking at is sort of like, it's actually housing. It's not just a tent village kind of thing.
Exactly. I was going to say, I'm also like Gavin confused about, the definition and how they've rebranded Ohana zones. But I think that ultimately it's not about getting someone into a shelter. It's about permanent supportive housing. And if you're looking at allocating, that much funding to, just continue a lifestyle that is, uninhabitable, from a clinical social work perspective, you're not going to be really getting a lot of return on your investment. You're going to still have the same negative behaviors. I mean, with all due respect to that encampment, they still have a high substance addiction issue out there. There's a lot of sanitation issues. I'm all supportive of people living off the grid, but if you're going to take resources from our community for your health conditions and your addictions and not give back to the community and put back in, then really
I would disagree there. I think lots of folks are giving back and doing great things for their community.
And that's fine, but if we want to look at, safe zones, so to speak, I mean, look at Camp Kikaha in Kailua Kona. I'm from there, and all the businesses, all they did was complain because there was a lot of vandalism and crime, and I don't think that's what we should be investing in. I think we should be investing in permanent supportive housing, maybe housing first for these chronic people. I mean, that has very positive results. I think we should just be a little bit more, and one thing I appreciate about Scott is he's really leveraged best practices from the federal level to really implement and look at our contracts to really drive performance-driven outcomes in these types of strategies. So, that's really what I want to talk about.
Here's another caller. About 1/3 of the homeless are mentally ill. The illness needs to be treated before they accept shelter. That's pretty tough. That's kind of contrary to what you're saying, but the laws do not allow family or guardians to help the mentally ill and stay on medication and in shelter. Court order for involuntary treatment is extremely expensive for a family. How far behind are we in our ability to actually help the mentally ill folks who are out there get into housing and stay in housing?
So 2 weeks ago, let me just back up for a second. 4 years ago, we tried to take one client through three different cycles of family court through the new assisted community treatment law. And all three judges turned down the case. The public defender was very supportive of protecting the individual rights of that client. Since then, we have poured our blood, sweat, and tears into educating the courts and making sure that everyone understands this new law. And just 2 weeks ago, Daryl, we went back to family court and we tried the petition again. And the public defender looks at that client and says, do you want to take your medication? And she said no. And so she, the public defender, advocated in support of her human rights. We have ultimately
be on the street and not take medication.
We have ultimately given these people so much human rights that they're allowed to die with their rights on, and our laws do not favor them. Our laws are so outdated that, it hasn't caught up with the medical treatment plans that are actually available.
Is that a
and useful.
Hawaii-specific thing?
I would agree. I think sometimes we're taking too protective of a stance, where what is best and what is needed, and what is necessary, the leadership that is necessary, that we need to. You can call it tough love, you can call it compassionate disruption, you can call it whatever you want, but we need to do what's in the best interest so people can make that wise, that informed choice, so they have the capacity to do that. Right now, we have basically, on average, about one homeless person per week that dies of unnatural causes, and meaning that we're so concerned about HIPAA, privacy laws, et cetera, that we stop reading about HIPAA and privacy laws and understanding and interpreting those laws and rules to make sure that we're enforcing them in the best interests of that person. What is the best interest?
Well, let me give Gavin a third. You used to be ACLU, right?
No.
Oh, I'm mixing you up with someone else. But I mean, still, you guys are very big advocates for the individual rights of homeless folks, right?
We care about people. We care about low-income people. I mean, individual rights are important. This isn't an issue that we have really weighed in on. I mean, mental health issues, mental health treatment, that's a.
Let me really quickly move on to drug abuse as an underlying cause, because I know that you can't be acquitted by reason of mental illness if it's due to drugs. And how much of our homeless population is just people who want to be free to use as much drugs as they want, anytime they want, and it's fueled by cheap drugs being available?
Well, that's easy to profile, but I think the important thing to remember is with our homeless service providers is some people say the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And so I think that's the most important thing that we need to focus on, is by getting them connected, then we can address those addictions.
I think we also have to understand the reason why people use illegal substances sometimes. So when you live on the street and you're by yourself and you don't have people to watch your back, you have to stay up. And sometimes people get addicted to meth because they use meth, quite frankly, to help them stay up, to keep themselves safe from being attacked on the street. Or there's some people that use meth or other drugs to keep awake so they can work sometimes 2 or 3 jobs to help get themselves out of homelessness, and then they just get hooked. So it really is an illness, and I think we have to, be cognizant of the reason why people get addicted to these types of substances and not look at them all just as criminals. And I think that's part of how we start to really understand and approach the issue. We have to look at it as an illness and figure out how do we, invest in the right type of programs and strategies to help treat the illness, help get people out of this situation, and ultimately to long-term housing.
Okay, this caller, thank you very much. Just wanted to say thank you to the panelists for all they do. She really appreciates tonight's discussion. We've only got a couple more minutes left. I'd like to go around the table. We've talked about a lot of problems, a lot of complexities, a lot of controversies, but I'd kind of like to get a quick, 30-second, how optimistic are you that in 10 years we're going to look back at this?
Again, I think
5 years, whatever. How long until we're looking back at this?
Again, I think we're really starting to build a foundation, and I agree with Gavin. Some of what we've seen come out of the legislature recently, just over the past few weeks, has been very positive. We've seen $15 million for homeless services, $200 million for affordable rental housing, and I think those are very positive signs. And I'm looking forward to when the point-in-time count numbers get released, hopefully sometime in mid-May, to see if we're continuing this positive momentum that we've been seeing.
J. King, what do you think?
Well, first, I think I appreciate what Gavin said in terms of being diverse. Homelessness is a humanitarian crisis. It's not just, it's right in our backyard. It's not just a housing one. So, homelessness is a summary of society's problems. So it's not just one solution.
Gavin, what do you think?
I think we need to keep investing, increase investing in what we need and what works. So more affordable housing, programs like Housing First, things that are data-driven, evidence-based that we know work.
Yeah, and we're bringing in players that never was before, so I would say I'm optimistic. Our Medicaid plans now, we have hospital systems, ER systems that are working together as part of coordinated entry. That has never been done before. Okay,
Kimo, with IHS, you've been fighting this on the ground for a long time. even though you're a young guy.
Thank you.
What do you how long until we look back at this and actually feel good about what we've done?
I hope soon. I think that, while we're off to a great start, yes, housing is one specific avenue, but I think that we really need to look at this comprehensively. There's a lot more work to be done. If we were to answer the question, have we turned the corner? I'd say no. I think we really need strong leadership at, a very high level to coordinate department heads to make sure we fix a lot of broken systems, and I think that needs to start right away.
Do you get the feeling, though, as others have said, that the legislature at least seems to be ready to put some money into this issue?
I hope so.
I hope that they're ready to learn and embrace the reality of the issue. It's not politics. It's a human condition that we're trying to help people, and so there's learning to be done. And it's not just a decimal point that's going to create the value here. It's actually them learning why the causes, what happens, and what they can do.
Well, I think that after 4 years, people have started to get it. It's my impression. So anyway, I just want to thank all of our viewers for joining us tonight, and especially thank our guests, Scott Morishige, the state's homeless coordinator, Gavin Thornton with the Hawaii Appleseed Center for Law and Economic Justice, Kimo Carvalho with the Institute for Human Services, and Jay King from Aloha United Way. Next week on Insights, we will continue to examine the homeless crisis in our islands. How much does the presence of homelessness in an area impact local businesses? I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Ahui ho.